Welcome to Habeas Treasures, where I try to decipher this book, There's Treasure Inside by John Collins Black, in order to find one of the 5 hidden treasures. On today's episode, I'm going to revisit the Pokemon box with some new ideas on some old concepts and lead us to a fascinating new place. Let's begin! One of the most popular lines in the Pokemon box story for treasure hunters to debate is this one about John Coltrane that occurs right after JCB teams up with the Froakie to hide the treasure. It reads, "I taped a lily pad to the top of my backpack and the Froakie climbed up and made himself comfortable. As we drove, we listened to some John Coltrane. It seemed appropriate." What's interesting is that there's almost universal agreement among Pokemon box hunters that the line about John Coltrane is a clue, but there isn't a consensus on what the clue means, or more importantly, where it could lead. After all, there are lots of connections to John Coltrane that you could make. He released over 60 albums and has many, many famous songs. Even if you just assume that the clue is probably one of his most popular songs like Giant Steps, how can you be sure you're on the right track and that the correct song isn't a different one like Alabama? Well, I think with clues like this that could lead in many different directions, JCB leaves us hints in the text on which direction to take. For instance, let's take a look at the passage again and focus on the last line. As we drove, we listened to some John Coltrane. It seemed appropriate. He specifically calls out that the connection to John Coltrane that seemed appropriate is made through driving. And I think this is the key. My guess is that to solve this clue, we need to find a connection between John Coltrane and driving. That seems appropriate. Here, watch this.
Jeep Grand Cherokee, music to the road. John Coltrane, music to the soul. The statement, pure poetry. The expression, pure genius. Which is why the Jeep Grand Cherokee succeeds, like the sound of John Coltrane, just by being itself. Jeep Grand Cherokee, now available with V8 engine.
It's interesting that Jeep used John Coltrane to promote the Jeep Grand Cherokee some 25 years after he died. It's also interesting that throughout the treasure book, JCB seems to be fond of using commercials to illustrate his point. For instance, if you're familiar with part 1 of the book, you will remember that he opens the Michael Jordan chapter talking about Gatorade, Pringles, and milk ads. And on the very first page of the Pokemon box story, he uses the phrase, "I brimmed to the rim with excitement," which many people think is a clue pointing to the old Brim decaf coffee commercials from the 1970s and 80s. So, I think it's possible that John Coltrane driving clue is a similar old ad for the Jeep Grand Cherokee. But I know what you must be saying to yourself. Yo, HT, I like the connection, but what does it mean? It's a great question. I think JCB might be pointing us to the word Cherokee. After all, in the story, when he asked the Froakie if he would like to join him to hide the treasure, here's what he wrote. "I told the Froakie all about the treasure box I needed to hide and asked if he might accompany me to help locate the best spot. He told me he thought this was a grand idea." Well, what better grand idea than the Grand Cherokee? Now, even this clue, Cherokee, on its own, could mean a lot of things. The Cherokee Indians lived in many of the states that are covered by the circular trip described in the Pokemon box story. This even includes Arkansas, which is a very popular spot for many Pokemon box hunters. Well, fortunately, I think JCB might be giving us another clue in this passage from the story. I thought about scheduling some training for the Froakie to assist him in becoming his more capable Greninja self. The phrase scheduling some training could mean to make a reservation, as in a Cherokee reservation. The Cherokee Nation is now located here in northeast Oklahoma. Now, we know it's unlikely that JCB hid the treasure on Indian land for legal reasons, but maybe the clue we were looking for is nearby the Cherokee reservation. And this is where it gets a bit nuanced in my opinion. JCB talks about scheduling the Froakie some training, but then ultimately decides against it because, quote, time was short. So is he saying that the clue is just short of the Cherokee reservation, like somewhere along the route they took to or from Houston that's close to the Cherokee Nation in Oklahoma? Well, when I went back through the Pokemon box story, looking for any signs of an Oklahoma clue, one line stood out. It's during the scene where JCB enters the jazz bar as a kid and is talking with the bartender. It reads, "What was this incredible world I had stepped into, I wondered. It was as if I'd walked through Kirk's wardrobe or Alice's looking glass. Are you okay, kid?" the bartender asked. I didn't really hear him. "This music, this place." The line, "Are you okay, kid?" caught my attention. OK is, of course, the abbreviation for Oklahoma. So this made me wonder, who is considered to be the Oklahoma Kid? Well, it turns out that Oklahoma has a favorite son, none other than legendary performer and humorist Will Rogers. Will was born in Uluga, Oklahoma, in 1879, and in addition to being Oklahoma's favorite son, he also identified as Cherokee. His parents were both part Cherokee, and he is often quoted as saying, "My ancestor did not come over on the Mayflower, but they met the boat." Now, what's also interesting about Will Rogers is he was a famous movie star. He made 50 silent films as well as 21 talkies. I wonder if JCB is referring to these silent films with the line, "I didn't really hear him." I think so, and here's why. Will Rogers died in an Alaskan plane crash in 1935, right at the height of his fame when he was the #1 box office draw in the entire world. Just a couple of months later, Route 66 was named the Will Rogers Highway in his honor. People found it fitting that this iconic road went from his birthplace in Oklahoma all the way to his more recent home in California. Now, stepping back for a minute, I like this connection between the Pokemon box story and Route 66. After all, the Pokemon box story is about a family road trip that took place in the 1970s, and Route 66 is probably the most famous road trip road in the United States. And we just learned that Route 66 happens to be named after one of the most famous Cherokees of all time, Will Rogers, who is known for being Oklahoma's favorite son, or, as I like to call him, the OK Kid. And Route 66 might also be why JCB starts off the Pokemon box story with the line, "I was 5.5 years old." Because if we convert 5.5 into months, we get, you guessed it, 66 months. I've always thought it likely that JCB would front-load an important clue in the opening line of the story. Maybe he's hinting at the importance of Route 66 right from the start. Now, I know what you must be thinking. "Oh, snap, HT, you really flowing for real now, G." Now, as a middle-aged man, I don't know what any of that means, but I am glad that you used the word snap because that leads me into the second half of this video. The place where Will Rogers grew up is just northwest of Tulsa, Oklahoma. There's a Will Rogers Museum in the nearby town of Claremore, Oklahoma, that's dedicated to telling the story of his life. Will Rogers is buried here on land that he purchased in 1911 that he intended to retire on before the tragic plane crash. Route 66 passes through Claremore on its way to Tulsa, and if you're traveling that direction, about 10 miles away is the town of Catoosa that is famous for having one of the best Route 66 roadside attractions called the Blue Whale of Catoosa. This whale was constructed in 1972 by Hugh Davis. It became part of a larger complex called Nature's Acres that included a building in the shape of Noah's Ark called the Animal Reptile Kingdom, or ARK for short. Nature's Acres became a popular tourist stop in the 1970s and 80s on Route 66, and the Blue Whale of Catoosa became famous. Now this is where I start to make connections back to the Pokemon box. I thought the name Catoosa is interesting. If you break it down, you get Cat 2, and most people believe that JCB has hidden a Mewtwo in the purple image at the end of the chapter. And a Mewtwo is modeled off of a cat-like creature, so Mewtwo and Cat 2, or Catoosa, have a bit in common. Also, a Mewtwo is only found in Pokemon games inside a cerulean cave. And cerulean is another word for blue. So basically, we're looking for a blue cave. Now, you could argue that a giant blue whale with his mouth open could be a proxy for a blue cave. But what else? Well, at the end of the Pokemon box story, when JCB is describing the purple picture with the hidden Mewtwo, he writes, "Oddly, only one picture was preserved well enough to make any sense out of it. I don't even remember taking this photo, although I do reckon it was closer to the end of our day. This snapshot is now the only evidence that any of this adventure ever happened at all." Now, I think he might be hinting at the blue whale in this passage too. He starts off with the sentence, "Oddly, only one picture was preserved well enough to make any sense out of it." Clearly, the sight of the blue whale by the side of the road is odd, so that fits. And it's the only thing that was preserved from the original Nature's Acres Park after the reptile exhibit closed. But I think he's using the line about the snapshot to also possibly connect to the whale, and here's why. In 2016, the social media company Snap, who make the Snapshot app, was promoting their new Snap Spectacles product. These were digital glasses that you could wear that would take pictures. In an effort to create a viral marketing moment, Snap would place yellow vending machines in different locations around the US for 24 hours. If people found the vending machine, they could buy a pair of Snap Spectacles. Snap placed the vending machines in picture-worthy places in the hopes that customers would buy a pair of glasses and then immediately take pictures and post them. The Blue Whale of Catoosa was one of the special places Snap chose for a vending machine, making the line, "This snapshot is now the only evidence that any of this adventure ever happened at all," kind of fit. Also, I learned that the other thing that the town of Catoosa is known for is that it's the location of a huge inland water port called the Tulsa Port of Catoosa. It's a giant multimodal hub for transportation. This inland port could be the connection to the Portland, Maine story that JCB tells in the Pokemon Box chapter. And remember how the entire complex around the blue whale was named Nature's Acres at one point? Well, this could be why JCB uses the line, "Nature was alive all around us," earlier in the story when talking about the Greninja. The past tense phrase, "nature was alive," seems appropriate here too, since the Nature Acres part closed down in the late 1980s. And finally, one of the key buildings that made Nature's Acres popular was the original Animal Reptile Kingdom, or Ark. The exhibit featured all sorts of reptiles, from snakes to lizards to alligators. Could this be why the Froakie, who looks like a lizard, said he liked the area so much that he wanted to stay? I don't know. There's a lot of connections that could be made between the Pokemon Box story and the Blue Whale of Catoosa attraction on Route 66. However, I have a hard time imagining that the treasure is hidden near the whale. However, I'm not ruling out the fact that it's part of the solve. A while back, I put out a video where I discussed why I think JCB might be using previous hunts as inspiration for the ones he's designed in There's Treasure Inside. I specifically call out that I think he may have modeled the Pokemon Box hunt after the book Breakfast, Tea, and Bourbon, which was also about a road trip involving New Orleans. In that hunt, the key to finding the location of the hidden treasure was combining insights from a flashback that happened earlier in the book to a path described later in the book. So it's possible that some aspect of the Blue Whale of Catoosa in Route 66 might combine with some other clues in the story to lead us to the final treasure spot. And if I were to speculate, I think it's also possible that the initials of the Animal Reptile Kingdom, ARK, that was shaped like Noah's Ark, might be telling us where to look. That's right, Arkansas. And you know what that means. Let's get ready to call the hogs. Ooh. Anyway, that's all I've got for today's video. I hope you enjoyed it and that it helps you with your hunt.